The United States is home to 334 million people. The way its population is distributed, however, is extremely disproportionate. While more people live in New York City than the 9 emptiest states combined, over half of all Americans live in the following 9 states, which take up just 21% of the US's landmass. Why? Find out in... And let's hit 5,000 likes for a video re-ranking all 50 states from worst to best. Number 9, North Carolina. With a booming economy, affordable cost of living, and warm climate, it's no surprise North Carolina is one of the most moved to states. But it's also always been populated, never slipping below the 15th most populous state in any US census. Unlike its urban contemporaries to the north, however, the Tar Heel state took its sweet time turning city chic. In fact, it was one of the last states to urbanize, with the majority of the population still living rurally until 1990. And even today, the cities aren't that dense or populated, with the largest, Charlotte, only being the 23rd most populous metro. How is it home to 10.7 million residents then? Especially since it's only the 28th largest state by total area? Well, unlike most southern states, North Carolina's diverse terrain historically wasn't suitable for plantations. So the largely agrarian economy instead relied on small subsistence farms. And while these family farms are sparsely populated when compared with cities, they're very populated compared to most rural areas. This, in addition to the rapid industrialization of many mid-sized cities over the past 70 years, has resulted in a dispersed population, but a large one nonetheless. Today, North Carolina is home to 8 different metro areas with over 400,000 residents, and has actually never seen a population decrease in any US census. Number 8. Georgia. Georgia is similar to its neighbor North Carolina in both population and area, but the ways in which they developed couldn't be more different. Georgia, the last of the 13 colonies, was originally only established in 1733 as a military buffer from Spanish Florida. So despite being the largest colony by total area, it had the smallest population, with Rhode Island, a colony 50 times tinier, having 6 times as many residents in 1750. But this quickly changed when the state permitted slavery the following year. Georgia's rich soil and great climate for the cultivation of cotton, indigo, and rice resulted in thousands of plantations and a population boom from just 5,200 residents in 1750 to over 1 million by the eve of the Civil War. However, since 44% of Georgians were slaves, the Peach State's agrarian economy came to a halt following the abolition of slavery in 1865. But one small railroad town saw opportunity in the New South. Atlanta, a city of only 11,000 when it burned to the ground in 1864, quickly rebuilt itself and became Georgia's new capital due to 3 major railroad lines converging in the city. And as new forms of transportation developed, Atlanta made sure to remain at the forefront, becoming an interstate hub and later in 1980, home to the busiest airport on Earth. Being the cultural center of the civil rights movement also led to additional growth, and the 1996 Olympics sealed the deal, catapulting Atlanta into the league of major world cities. Today, the metro population is the 8th largest in the nation at 6.24 million, and it's home to 57% of Georgia's 10.91 million residents. Number 7, Ohio. Ohio is a microcosm of the United States. While 80% of Americans live in cities, our population is evenly distributed throughout many cities, with 55 different metro areas housing over 1 million residents. Similarly, 77% of Ohio's population is urban and also spread out, with 3 different cities having metro populations around 2.2 million, in addition to 3 more with 800, 700, and 600,000. But although Ohio isn't home to a single top 30 largest metro area today, Cincinnati and Cleveland were once 2 of America's most important cities. Cincinnati's central location on the Ohio River, America's main east to west interstate before railroads, made it the ideal stopping point for travelers and goods heading from Pittsburgh to the Mississippi River. And its presence as a transportation hub only grew with the creation of canals which connected it to Lake Erie and the East Coast. As a result, steamboat construction surged, as did the meatpacking industry. And by 1850, Cincinnati was the nation's port capital and 5th largest city. Cleveland's rise to prominence occurred slightly later, transforming into a major manufacturing center during the Civil War. And when oil was discovered nearby, it became the nation's oil capital until 1901. This, in addition to the rapidly diversifying industrial economy, particularly with automobile and airplane assembly lines, turned Cleveland into the 5th largest metropolis by 1920. And while, like most of the Rust Belt, these cities' heydays are long gone, with the state of Ohio actually decreasing in population today, its legacy as either the 3rd or 4th most populous state for over a century remains, with Ohio still housing 11.76 million residents. Number 6. Illinois. If it weren't for Kansas, Illinois would be the most boring state in terms of natural beauty. I mean, 75% of it is empty farmland, and over 50% of it is completely flat. So how the heck is it the 6th most populated state with 12.58 million residents? One word: Chicago. The current 3rd largest U.S. city with a metro population of 9.27 million is home to more people than all but 10 states and 75% of all Illinoisans. And with Illinois' next largest city, Peoria, only having a metro population of 363,000, no other state is so reliant on one city for its relevance. But why did Chicago become America's most important city, not named New York, for most of the 20th century? Location. Situated on the southwestern shores of Lake Michigan, Chicago was the nearest point between the Great Lakes and Mississippi River watershed. So when the first canal linking the two opened here in 1848, effectively connecting the Atlantic Ocean with the Gulf of Mexico, Chicago promulgated itself as the nation's mecca of transportation. And its status only escalated when it was also chosen as the railroad capital in the 1850s. Chicago's central location near a variety of natural resources also resulted in it becoming a meatpacking, lumber, grain, and steel hub, with the population growing from just 4,000 residents in 1840 to the nation's 2nd most populous city by 1890. So while Chicago hit its peak sometime in the 1960s and is currently losing residents, since it had cemented itself as America's 2nd city for a century, it's endured the country's shift to suburbanization and deindustrialization better than most. Number 5. Pennsylvania. Spanning just 46,000 square miles, Pennsylvania is small. In fact, it's only the 33rd largest state by area and less than half the size of Wyoming. Why then does it have 22 times Wyoming's population at 12.97 million residents? Well, history. Due to its central location in relation to the 13 colonies, Pennsylvania's most populous city, Philadelphia, hosted the Continental Congresses, the writings and signings of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, and was even our country's capital until 1800. But it was industrialization throughout the 19th century, particularly in textile manufacturing, which led to the economic and population explosion that kept Philadelphia as the 2nd largest metro until 1900. Today, it's the 7th largest, home to 6.24 million residents. But that only accounts for half the state's population, because Philadelphia only tells half of Pennsylvania's story. Pennsylvania has the unique distinction of being both East Coast and Midwest. So while Philadelphia was an East Coast dynamo, the state's 2nd largest city, Pittsburgh, also became the most influential Rust Belt city. In fact, it was so rich that just one neighborhood, East End, controlled 40% of the nation's wealth in 1900. This was due to Pittsburgh becoming the steel capital of the world, producing half of the nation's steel by 1910. And from 1840 to 1980, it was one of the nation's 10 largest metros. Pennsylvania is also home to a bunch of mid-sized cities you've probably never heard of, like Allentown, Harrisburg, Scranton-Wilkes-Barre, and Lancaster. So although the state is losing population, people can't leave fast enough for it to no longer be populated. Number 4. New York. New York is as synonymous with America as apple pie, solely because of its city bearing the same name, which also just so happens to be our nation's financial, media, theater, marketing, sports, fashion, and trash bag capital. But while it's obvious that New York City is why New York State is so populated, why has New York City always been the largest US city? Well, for starters, $1 pizza, but also its location on a massive deepwater natural harbor, along with multiple vital waterways such as the Hudson River and later the Erie Canal, which created the first navigable connection between the Atlantic Ocean and Great Lakes. So by the 1820s, New York had become America's largest port and center of trade. smart governance and industrialization in the second half of the 19th century, followed by the largest wave of immigration in American history, followed by more cumulative causation, transformed New York into the center of nearly every important industry, with the metro population soaring from 131,000 in 1820 to 7.8 million a century later, passing London to become the largest city on Earth. Today, 19.56 million people call the metro area home, which is nearly the entire state's population of 19.68 million. But since a sizable portion of it lives in New Jersey and Connecticut, New York State is home to a few other sizable historic cities too, such as Albany, Rochester, and Buffalo, each home to metro populations over 900,000. Now, sure, upstate New York has struggled over the past 60 years, and even New York City's population is in decline, but the state still has a near 7 million resident lead over Pennsylvania, so it'll likely be the fourth largest state for the rest of our lives. Now, before we get to the final three, make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and let me know which state on this list you'd actually want to live in. And I wanted to give a couple of quick honorable mentions to New Jersey and Massachusetts, the fifth and sixth smallest states by land area, which combined take up just 15,000 square miles, or around 1/10 the size of Montana. Their combined population would be 15 times Montana's, however, with New Jersey housing 9.26 million residents and Massachusetts 6.98 million. Now, in Massachusetts' case, Boston, the capital and largest city, accounts for 70% of the population due to having one of the nation's strongest economies for nearly 400 years. The reason New Jersey is so populated, however, isn't as obvious. While it's the most densely populated state, it doesn't have a single metro area with more than 380,000 residents. Instead, its location near both New York City and Philadelphia resulted in many suburbs and satellite cities, which are some of the most densely populated parts of the country. In fact, Jersey City is the nation's most densely populated city other than New York, and it and its suburbs are home to 2.17 million residents. The New Brunswick-Lakewood division of the NYC Metro houses an additional 2.38 million, and Newark, which is very much its own city with plenty of industry and amenities, is home to an additional 2.18 million, meaning 6.7 million, or nearly 3/4 of all New Jerseyans, live within 35 miles of Manhattan. Number 3, Florida. It's been 10 years since Florida passed New York to become the third largest state by population. But unlike any other state on this list, Florida was one of the least populated states for most of its history. Because prior to the 1940s, it was hell on earth, with oppressive heat and humidity and millions of mosquitoes. In fact, before bug control, an estimated 500 mosquitoes would land on a person per minute in southern Florida. But despite all this, the Great Freeze of 1894 to 1895, where all crops in the US failed apart from those in Miami, emphasized its importance as an agricultural hub. And thus, the first railroad to Miami was completed in 1896, with huge dredging efforts turning much of its wetlands into farmland. Florida's population never truly boomed, however, until after World War II and the introduction of affordable air conditioning. Overnight, Florida became a land of opportunity, with year-round warm weather, a cheap cost of living, and low taxes, resulting in enormous migration from the Northeast and Midwest. The increased popularity of airplane travel also solidified the state as a beach tourism destination, and after the opening of Disney World in 1971, the #1 most visited state, which led to a construction boom, bringing in hundreds of thousands of jobs. The population swelled from just 1.9 million residents in 1940 to 9.7 million in 1980 and 22.24 million today. And with the state still attracting plenty of Latin American immigrants, as well as Northerners looking to escape their cold, expensive states, Florida is currently the fastest growing state. Number 2. Texas. Until Alaska was admitted into the Union in 1959, Texas was by far the largest state by total area. And its massive size of 268,000 square miles, along with its abundance of natural resources, is the main reason it's so darn populated. Following statehood in 1845 and the completion of its first railroads in the 1850s, Texas became a hotspot for ranchers and farmers due to the vast amount of rich soil and wide open space. It quickly flourished as the cattle capital of the country, catapulting it from the 7th least populated state in 1850 to the 6th most populated by 1900. But 83% of Texans were still living rurally then, as opposed to the 84% who live in urban areas today. The shift started with the discovery of the largest known oil reserves on Earth in 1901, which transformed Texas's economy and turned Houston into the energy capital of the world. Texas's three other large cities, Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin, all rapidly urbanized in the decades to follow too, due to booming economies in their respective industries, a mild climate, and the rise of cheap, quality suburbs. So while the Midwest and Northeast suffered huge blows from deindustrialization in the 1970s to 90s, Texas thrived, becoming the third most populous state in 1980 and second most by 2000. Today, the population sits at a gargantuan 30.03 million. And at the rate it's still growing, Texas will likely be the most populous state within 20 years. Number 1. California. California was the fastest state ever admitted into the Union. Taking just 2 years after the discovery of gold in 1848 led to the largest gold rush in U.S. history. And ever since, it's been the fastest growing state. But while San Francisco's location near the gold, along with an incredible deepwater harbor, turned it into the nation's 10th largest city in 1870, it wasn't until black gold, or oil, was discovered in a little town called Los Angeles in 1892, followed by the rise of the film, agriculture, and tech industries in the decades to follow, that California would see the monumental growth that transformed it into the second most populous state by 1950, and the largest just 12 years later. Today, 38.94 million Californians call the Golden State home, which is almost the population of the entire country of Canada, despite Canada's area being 23 times larger. If you want to find out why Canada's so empty, there's a video on screen now. Go check it out.